Hello, this is Pastor Matthew Woods from Grace Lutheran Church, and this is the weekly devotion for Holy Week, Monday, the 25th of March, 2024. Today's title, The Witnesses of Good Friday. Springfield, Illinois may not be on your radar, but it stands out in history as the place where Abraham Lincoln was buried. Lincoln probably traveled more when he was dead than when he was alive, because his funeral procession, the train that took him around, took him to over 400 cities, and hundreds of thousands of people got to see him. Yet history tells us that he finally arrived at Springfield, Illinois, and he didn't exactly rest in peace. It turns out Abraham Lincoln's coffin was, moved around quite a bit at his monument, his memorial. For various reasons, and it was pried open twice. The first occasion was in 1887, 22 long years after the assassination. The reason? Because there was an attempted theft of his body, and then there were rumors that Lincoln was not in the casket after years of being moved, buried, and reburied. It was decided that the custodian of the Lincoln Memorial would open the casket along with other witnesses to confirm that Lincoln's body was still in the casket, that he was still there, and then they would lay him to rest for what they thought would be the last time. These witnesses watched as the casket was unsealed with lead, and then resealed, by the way, with lead, and set inside a 6-foot vault. Unfortunately, the monument was crumbling from poor foundations. So Lincoln's only surviving son, Robert Lincoln, set to rebuilding the monument. And once again, the body of Abraham Lincoln was dug up and moved to a temporary location for 18 months, along with Mary Todd and his 2 brothers who had passed on as well. It was finally finished in 1901. It was decided, though, at that time, that 16 witnesses would once again confirm that Lincoln's body was still in the casket after burying Lincoln afterwards they buried Lincoln under 2 tons of concrete. One last time, right? Finally at rest, we hope. Well, witnesses are all over the events of Good Friday and Easter Sunday, not only looking at the body of Jesus, but at a resurrected Jesus as well. We don't have to look far to discover, for instance, the corruption of the legal process that Jesus endured. We look at Pilate and the chief priests, for example, as our first witnesses. In much the same way that Jezebel set up Naboth in 2 Kings chapter 21, the high priest tries to set Jesus up with witnesses against him. Matthew 26:59 and following tells us how frustrated they got. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many witnesses came forward. It didn't work so well. We know that this trial, though, was illegally held at night at Caiaphas's private residence behind closed doors, so they could informally set Jesus to a guilty verdict. And at first light, they formally charged Jesus and rushed him off to Pilate, where we would see more corruption and weakness. Pilate declared, by the way, Jesus innocent no less than 7 times. The first time was in John 18:29 through 38, or Luke 23:4, when he says, I find no fault in this man. The last time was found in John 19:7 through 12, when Pilate heard of Jesus describing himself as the Son of God. Upon this, Pilate sought to release him, we're told. However, Pilate would never release Jesus, because the pressure was put on him by the crowd, and eventually he would be put to death. There would be no justice for Jesus. But the law of Rome, and the law of God for that matter, also witnesses, declare Jesus innocent. 2 other witnesses who were sort of drawn into the events of Good Friday, rather randomly it seems, were Barabbas and Simon of Cyrene. In Matthew 27, we are told of Barabbas, a notorious rebel who deserved to be crucified. And so what happens is of course, Pilate brings him forward and offers a paschal amnesty, thinking that the obvious choice would be Jesus. But that just didn't happen, of course. Barabbas was eventually set free by the crowd, and Jesus would go on to be crucified. But the witness is that the sinner would be set free, while Jesus would receive the unfair treatment and, of course, be crucified for the sinner. And then there is Simon of Cyrene, who we are told in Matthew 27:32 was forced by Roman soldiers to help a very weakened Jesus carry the cross. In Matthew 16:24, Jesus says to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Well, Simon did not do so willingly, but was voluntold to walk alongside this man whom he'd never met, whose face and body were beaten and swollen, scourged, bleeding, breathing heavily, stumbling and weak, and barely able to carry himself, let alone a cross. Certainly another witness to the unfair treatment of Jesus to say, for sure, but I wonder how this may have affected him in the long run. But in the end, however, the cross would not rest on Simon's soldiers, but on Jesus's. And even for those of us who deny ourselves and carry our cross, that cross will never know the full weight of it, truthfully, the full measure, as Jesus did on Good Friday. At some point, in fact, that cross will be lifted off of us and placed on him every time. And then, of course, we know about the two criminals, one on Jesus' right and one on Jesus' left. One comes to faith and witnesses for Jesus in Luke 23. The other does not come to faith, in fact, mocks Jesus. Certainly, these are witnesses to the sheep and the goats, the wheat and the tares, the good and the bad of Jesus' parables of separation, distinguished by one's relationship with Jesus. The two men were under the same condition, under the same sentence and suffering for their crimes, and yet one comes to faith while the other does not. Good Friday is where this sifting takes place. Another pair of witnesses, of course, are from the wealthy class, the Sanhedrin, the high office itself, Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea. I can't help but think of Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea as two men of a delayed witness of faith. We learn why they didn't come forward in Matthew 19:38 and 39. It tells us later, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body of Jesus. Now, Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly because he feared the Jewish leaders. With Pilate's permission, he came and took the body away. He was accompanied by Nicodemus, the man who earlier came to Jesus at night. At the death of Jesus, perhaps assuming the worst could have been done by now, these men summoned the courage to come out of the shadows. They buried Jesus' body in Joseph's family tomb, affectionately, by the way, including Jesus as a member of his own family in the process. Yet it would be Joseph who would be welcomed into Jesus' family because of the tomb. Another pair of witnesses are the soldiers and the centurion who led them. This was not just another crucifixion, and they could sense that. At least the centurion could. The soldiers cast lots for Jesus' clothing, fulfilling Psalm 22:18. The centurion, on the other hand, watched Jesus very closely. Isaiah 53:7 tells us he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. Jesus received the cross bravely. For a hardened soldier centurion who had probably seen it all before, with the crowds, the venomous words, and so on, Jesus seemed to welcome the cross, and he watched. And then the darkness and the earthquake did not go unnoticed either. The compilation of experiences and things that went on there moved him enough to declare in Mark 15:39, Surely this man was the Son of God. Finally, another pair of witnesses were the angels at the tomb and the women on Easter Sunday. Now, I know I said this is Good Friday, but you don't have Easter or Good Friday without Easter Sunday. Up to this point, all the other witnesses to Jesus tried to condemn. They tried to condemn Jesus unfairly. There was a fear of religious leaders. There were colleagues or not, doesn't matter. They were afraid of them. Witnesses to the unfair treatment and abuse, all the way to the death of the cross and the burial thereafter. Like the witnesses of Lincoln's tomb, all they saw was a wounded man and eventually a dead body. When the women arrive at the tomb on Easter morning in Matthew 28, we are told that they were met by an angel with a very different message and a very different thing to witness. Luke 24 tells us that there were two angels. However, only one does the talking, which is why Matthew only mentions the one angel. The message was simple. Don't be afraid. Jesus is risen. He is not here. See where he lay, and then go tell the disciples. Both witness to an empty tomb, the angels and the women. Added to this, the angels emphasize what Jesus said beforehand. And then begins to make sense in Luke 24, 6 through 8. Likewise, the disciples would emphasize their own witness to the same events eventually in Acts 5:32. The angels witness to the witness to the women witness to the disciples, and the disciples ultimately to the world. The body hadn't been moved or reburied, stolen or displaced, but had risen. This is a long way from the shape of things witnessed on Good Friday. The only wounds of Jesus were the nail marks and the hole in his side. Now, we mentioned many witnesses. We left off many others. The Lincoln tomb is really a mere curiosity compared to this, and yet much is remembered and passed on by witnesses who stole a look at that casket, right, back at the day. They found a body. It was still there. Jesus, on the other hand, is more than a curiosity. Everyone who heard what had happened in Jerusalem on Good Friday, the town all heard about it. Jesus was too famous for it to be otherwise. Rumors of Jesus resurrected from the dead would have also spread rumors, if you will, that people would pay attention to, especially with such an important figure. Now, Jesus is certainly a lot more important than Lincoln. And many came to faith because of those witnesses. The Bible mentions many witnesses, teaching us that witnesses are important. Well, it's good to remember that our witness, most of all today, has the same power and authority as we demonstrate our faith in the crucifixion and in the resurrection of Jesus. And so we are called to be those witnesses. May the Lord bless us as we do this and as we celebrate Holy Week this week. May God bless you and your faith as we go forward. In the name of Jesus, amen. Well, thanks for being with me today. I look forward to seeing you next week as we think more about the resurrection. Take care. See you then. Bye-bye.